Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. And my guest this week has a manifesto to change the world. In fact, he's written it as a book. Dale Vince has got an amazing life story. He left school at 15. He became a traveller, an activist. In his own words, he went from enemy of the state to green energy tycoon and dedicated his life to challenging conventional wisdom in pursuit of a better way to live. He is the owner of Ecotricity, the green energy company. He's one of the pioneers of the electric vehicle charging network in this country and the use of green transport. And he's also a big campaigner on food. And to that end, he is one of the backers and executive producers of the Netflix film Seaspiracy, which is getting a huge amount of attention at the moment and causing a lot of column inches because it's making people wonder whether they should stop eating fish altogether. He's also, incidentally, the owner of perhaps the greenest and only vegan football club, Forest Green Rovers. So an awful lot to talk about. Dale Vince, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I just wanted to start with a line from sort of the middle of your book, which I think is really fundamental, which is about the way we live, because you say that our detachment from the consequences of the way we live is a key driver of unsustainability and climate change. Could you just explain that?
Yeah, I think modern life detaches us from the impacts of the things that we do, cause and effect to a degree, the effect of the things that we do. Take food as an example. Meat is a supermarket product. It's been sanitized. It's a long way removed from the cruelty and the brutality of industrial farming and the climate change impacts and stuff like that, shrink wrapped in plastic and just presented as a commodity. It's part of an animal that's lived a short, brutal life for a food choice that we don't need to make. And also take electricity. When I lived on the road towards the end of my 10 years, I had a little windmill powering my life. And I realized then that, we've lost connection with where our power comes from. So we reach for a light switch, we press it and it comes on and that's it. We don't think about it. But, I'm going back 20 years. I discovered that the way we make electricity was the biggest single cause of climate change. And I thought that was a big deal, And having a little windmill and some batteries myself, I was very conscious of when the wind blew. I could see the energy coming in through my meter. And I was very conscious of the energy that I used. And I think we lose that connection in modern life because everything is made easy and sanitized for us, but very much detached from the implications.
Can I just ask you about Seaspiracy? I mean, I don't know how involved in it you were as an executive producer. I know people, often aren't very, but I know you've put money into the project to help it get off the ground. It does seem to be having a big impact.
Yeah, massive impact. And I can understand why. I mean, the content of that film is shocking. It's stuff that some people know about, but it's stuff that most people have no idea about. And I think it's going to make a lot of people change their diet. So Kip came to see me about 4 years ago. He'd made Cowspiracy, which was a film along similar lines, really, about intensive animal agriculture on land. And he wanted to make a seaborne version. And I'd been friends and working with Sea Shepherd for a long time at that point, and was very concerned about what was happening in the oceans and stuff. And I really wanted to see the film made. So my role really was to put up some money to help get the film made. But that was it.
The central proposition of that film is that there's no such thing as sustainable fishing. And that's the badge we see on our supermarket packets when we go and buy our pieces of salmon that makes us feel that this is okay to buy. And I mean, is this what you feel about the eating of all animals, that there is no such thing as a sustainable way to eat animals?
Yes, I would say yes. I mean, that's a simple one-word answer. And if you look at what we have to put into an animal to get back what we get out, with a cow, we have to put up to 10 times as much plant protein into a cow as we get back out, and this plant protein is grown in parts of the world that have been taken from wildlife, from nature. It's causing massive habitat depletion and species extinction, in fact, not just in the Amazon, but all over the world, to feed animals that are cooped up in sheds for like a 12 or 18-month life before they're slaughtered. For a food choice we don't need to make. We didn't used to eat this much meat in Britain 50, 60 years ago. It's abnormal, but it's been fueled by cheap, abundant fossil fuels, by marketing, by intensive animal agriculture, which really prioritizes price over animal welfare completely. I mean, the way we treat animals today is an absolute scandal.
But what about the poorest communities? I mean, there's a sequence in that film in which it suggests that piracy off the coast of Africa is partly a result of factory fishing, which has taken away the ability of coastal communities to just catch fish for themselves. Do you think those poorest communities who have been fishing and not depleting stocks for centuries should be allowed to continue? And that is a source of sustainable fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the evidence is clear. In Somalia, for example, the pirates of Somalia are ex-fishermen. There's no fish left to catch, so they turn to piracy. We created that. I think there are big foreign fishing fleets cruising the oceans of the world, sucking up all of the fish, destroying the seabed and that kind of stuff. It's a crime. It's a crime against humanity and the environment. Coastal fishing communities, I think, can fish sustainably, but it's the industrialization of fishing, as it is with animal agriculture on land. It's the industrialization that's the root of the problem.
So is it about choice? I mean, is it about if you live in an advanced society, a rich society, in which you have a choice to go plant-based in an interesting way, you should?
Yeah, I think so. But, I would... Back to my earlier point, 50, 60 years ago, we didn't used to eat this much meat. We've changed our diet choice since the end of the Second World War, really. And industrial farming has made that possible. It is about choice, but it's about reverting to a previous choice that we used to make, which was to eat very much less meat and dairy and fish, in fact. I mean, there are 8 billion humans on the planet, and a lot of people say that's the problem. There are too many of us. And, it's a problem, but it's the 80 billion animals that we farm and kill every year, and that we clear forests to grow soya to feed to, and get these incredible diminishing returns of efficiency. It's the most inefficient way to feed ourselves. It makes no sense, not economically, not environmentally, and not in terms of human health, because it's actually bad for us. That there's overwhelming evidence of the carcinogenic effects of meat, for example. 14 of the 15 major diseases that make people die prematurely come from eating animals.
One of the targets of the film is this organisation, the Marine Stewardship Council, which is one of those organisations whose sort of label you might see on a packet of fish that tells you it's sustainable. They have now, having not cooperated with the film, they've now put out a response in which they accuse the film of sort of just getting its facts wrong. And they say it's wrong to say there's no such thing as sustainable fishing. One of the amazing things about our oceans is that fish stocks can recover and replenish if they're managed carefully for the long term. Examples of where this has happened and stocks have come back from the brink include the Patagonian toothfish in the southern oceans or the recovery of the Namibian hake, and it goes on.
Yeah, they sound like pretty exotic species, actually, don't they? What about cod in the North Sea? What about fish closer to home? I know that Sea Shepherd have been fighting to save the Patagonian toothfish for a long time. That hasn't just happened through stewardship. There's been real intervention by activists that's helped to do that. Of course fish will replenish if they're given the chance, but that's the big if. It isn't happening, and industrial fishing is just wrong.
Your story is bizarre because you've gone from being a man with nothing to a man with everything, really. So let's just go over that a little bit. What were you like when you were a teenager?
Troubled, rebellious, bumping into rules, a little bit wild, carefree, reckless. As a kid, I was kind of inventive. I like to make things. I like to learn things. When I was 11, I wanted to be an astronaut and then realized I'd been born too soon. That was a big disappointment in my life. I left school 15 because I hated being at school. I hated the rules, the uniform, the kind of, the whole structure of it. I felt I was being trained for the world of work. And I didn't want that. I didn't know what I wanted to do because I'd never had the chance to find out. All of the life that I could really remember was being in school. And I just wanted to get out. And the day I left, I felt was the happiest day of my life. I felt like I'd got out of prison. It was fantastic.
Were you brought up with activism or politics around you? I mean, were your parents into all of this stuff or environmentalism?
No, on the contrary.
So where did your interest come from?
I don't know. I think it's innate, I was concerned about sustainability. Probably, the earliest recollection I have is in my book, but, I would have been 11 or 12 or something like that, or maybe 13. And I was cycling home from school and thinking about how many cars there were on the road and how much fuel they carried and where it all came from, and when it would run out. And nobody was talking about when it would run out. And that seemed wrong to me because it had to run out. I used to, like I said, I like to invent and make things, and I used to power them with batteries. Back in the day, they were quite rudimentary. They didn't last very long, and then you had to throw them away. And so I was very conscious then of the value of energy. And this was the early 70s. So that was my first thought. I think it's innate in me to care about sustainability.
And so why did you join the Travellers?
I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I wanted space to find out. And it wasn't long before I realized that if I lived in town, any old town, and didn't want a job, then I was living a very marginalized life and excluded life. It's almost impossible to do. And I'd been to a couple of festivals and seen people living in vehicles, living on the road. And I thought this had to be the way for me to live, because I would be more free of all the stuff that comes with living in a town, like having rent and stuff that you can't pay, and not having money to, buy food or whatever. I just thought it would be a great life choice. So I hit the road. I bought an old ambulance for 50 quid, I think it was, one day, jumped in it and just drove. We're talking before sat-nav, before mobile phones, before the internet, all this kind of stuff. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to, get out there on the road and hopefully bump into other people and just live a different life. I was looking for another way to live.
And you did it for a long time. this wasn't sort of a childhood phase.
I did it for a decade. And my God, I had some adventures, I could tell you, and lived in some amazing vehicles. I became a really adept mechanic. My specialty was pulling a petrol engine out of a really old vehicle, because they all used to be petrol, and putting a diesel in. And I would do it in the middle of a field with no workshop and barely any tools and that kind of stuff. I used to... at one point, go and park in a scrapyard over winter, build something new, and then drive out in the spring. I had great fun. And towards the end of that 10 years, I was using a windmill to power my life. And, I guess that was what triggered the epiphany in the early 90s, when I decided I needed to drop back in and try and build a big windmill to make a change, make a difference.
Yeah, you do call it an epiphany, and that's a big word. Was it a process or a moment?
Yeah, it was a moment, really. Like I said, I'd been 10 years on the road. I had this little windmill. I was kind of thinking about energy. I was conscious of where it came from and how valuable it was and that kind of stuff. And I saw the first windmills pop up in Cornwall. I went down and chatted to the farmer, and I was really impressed by them. And I simply thought to myself, I could spend another 10 years living like this myself, my own low impact lifestyle, or I could drop back in and try and build a big windmill on this hill I was parked up on, which I knew was windy because I had a windmill, and try and make a difference that way. I knew that making electricity was the biggest driver of climate change back then, and I was bothered about climate change, and I thought, let's do it.
And when you're 15 and you've left school and then you spend 10 years on the road and then want to start a business, how easy is that? How did you understand what to do?
That's a good question. I didn't want to start a business per se. I just wanted to build a big windmill on this hill. I hadn't really kind of thought it through. But what I did was just to start to try to learn everything I could about modern wind energy, modern windmills. And the first thing I learned I needed was a tower to measure the wind at 30 meters tall. And I didn't have the money to buy one, but I had the means to build my own. So I built a 30-meter tower, stuck it up on this hill. Then I learned about data collection, had to measure wind speed and direction for 12 months. This is a fundamental part of a financial model or business plan, to raise finance and to know that you actually had a viable site. And then looked at grid connections, planning permissions, which is a whole world of its own, then financial modeling and raising the money. And I never had the answer for any of these problems. And individually, each one of them could have completely stumped the project. Like when I first went to the grid company, they said to me, we don't take it seriously. Come back when you've got planning permission. So I spent a few years doing that. And when I went back, they said, it'd be £1.5 million to connect to the grid here. Well, the whole project was only £300,000 capex. and would have killed it, but argued with them over a period of another couple of years and got it down to £30,000, which is an incredible difference. So the attitude of the grid company or companies back then was really poor when somebody wanted to connect to the local grid. But I overcome these obstacles one at a time.
And how did you think of what you were doing? I mean, were you still being an activist at that stage, or were you now building a business?
I'd never been interested in building a business as such. I was trying to build a windmill. And I guess that was an act of activism. I wanted to change the way electricity was made in Britain. And it was just that, really. So I guess it was activism through business. And I remember thinking, would have been 1995, I could see that I was about to build the windmill within a few months. And I remember thinking that to build more, I needed to get a fair price for the energy. So I went to see the local grid company and tried to offer them that. They laughed at the idea, and I realized I had to cut out the middleman, become an energy supplier in order to build more windmills. And at that time, I considered it two possible ways to approach this: one as a business and one as a kind of charity, to go to other people and say, look, green energy is a thing that you could have. It's a good thing, and you should pay for it. It'll cost you a little bit more, or try to turn it into a business proposition whereby it didn't cost people more, and it was anyway a good thing to do. So I chose to use the model of business to advance this environment cause in 1995.
I mean, as you say, back then people were laughing at this stuff and not really taking it seriously. And if they were, it was always only a fringe, interest. It was never going to be the totality of our energy supply. And I suppose a lot of people who did take climate change seriously kind of assumed that nuclear would be the future and that we would have a little mix of other stuff. And we've had a sort of a big, a sea change in attitude, but it's taken 25 years. I mean, do you have a sense of why it's taken so long for people to get this?
Well, I guess, fossil fuels have been ingrained in our culture, in our economy for a long time, actually. And renewable energy was brand new. Modern windmills were emerging technology in the early 90s. And so I guess you've got the combination of the very new challenging the very old, and that just took time. Even now, our economy is skewed towards fossil fuels. Support through taxes and subsidies and regulations is overwhelmingly in favor of fossil fuels, not renewable energy. And yet, we're in a place in Britain now where nearly 50% of our electricity comes from renewable energy, which is amazing.
But I mean, all energy companies, it seems, now have either a green tariff or some sort of green element to it. Is there a lot of greenwashing going on?
Yeah, sure there is. Plenty of it. But that's been going on since the late 90s, probably, as big power companies kind of, began to dabble in green energy. And I think it's driven by the fact that people increasingly want green energy. They want to see green outcomes in everything, actually.
So can we believe it when we see a green tariff on our energy bill, if we're not with an explicitly green company?
There are shades of green, I would say. There are kind of levels of engagement. So at the shallowest end, companies are just buying pieces of paper, certificates called REGOs. They're like birth certificates for green energy, and they ensure that green energy isn't sold twice. So fair enough, that's an accounting system that works. And then the middle stage of engagement is where a company will buy the certificates and the energy, and so they put that energy into the grid for their customers. And the best level of engagement is the one where a company does both of those things and builds new forms of green energy itself, because it's not enough just to trade existing green energy. We've got to build new stuff. Only 2 companies in Britain, and in fact, at the moment, only 1 company in Britain does that. But anyway, I'll leave you to guess.
And that's you. Yeah. Well, I mean, the really exciting thing, it seems to me, that you're doing is building green gas from grass. Just explain how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited about that as well, because as an environmentalist, I always felt that we had to give gas up. We had a way to make green electricity. It started with wind energy in the early 90s. Solar came along in the late 90s and has really come a long way now. Solar and wind together are a super combination, but I thought we had to give up gas. And then I think it was 2010 that I discovered there was green gas being made in Europe and put into the gas grid, and that was a possibility. So we went looking for ways to make green gas in Britain, and we found there were 2 conventional routes. One was food waste, and the other was energy crops, and they've both got big sustainability and environment issues. So we needed to find another way, and we found grass, and we found actually that the energy content of grass is far higher. And it's a cleaner outcome. And of course, we've got a lot of it. We found that there's enough marginal grassland in Britain, as in not being used to grow food for humans or animals, to make enough gas to power all of Britain's 28 million homes or whatever it is, which for me was a kind of massively exciting concept that we can make our own gas. I mean, at the moment, we spend £7 billion a year on gas to burn it, and it goes up in the atmosphere, it contributes to the climate crisis and all that kind of stuff. So we produced a report that shows that if we instead make our own gas here in Britain, not only can it be climate neutral, but we can create something like 70,000 jobs in the rural economy. It's going to help farmers to diverse away from animal farming, which is quite perfect. It creates wildlife habitats in the process on an unprecedented scale, because the land is just mown twice a year and it's otherwise organic and left to go wild. And there are so many great benefits from it. I mean, I'm super excited because also it means we haven't got to rip out all of our gas appliances and replace them with electricity. And that would require a massive increase in electricity on the grid as well. So we can avoid all of those issues and we can make renewable gas. That's what excites me.
But can we? I mean, is green gas itself a con? Because you've still got to burn it and it's still got to release carbon into the atmosphere.
Yeah, but it's carbon neutral over a very short lifespan, like 6 months. How? Well, because when the grass grows, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, and that's the carbon that you release when it's anaerobically digested to make the gas, and then, as you say, the gas is burnt. But it's a very short closed loop.
So are you suggesting that we don't need to switch to heat pumps or hydrogen, all of these technologies that are going to be very expensive, which is what we're talking about at the moment, may not be needed, and that we can just stick with our gas boilers if we switch to the production of green gas? Is that a serious proposition?
Absolutely is, and I don't understand why the government haven't picked this up yet. We put our report out 5 or 6 years ago, and still the government talks about putting billions into the hydrogen economy. And people talk about heat pumps and stuff like that. Look, I think there's a role for heat pumps. Absolutely, why not? And there's a role for hydrogen as well, because in order to get to 100% green electricity on the grid, we've got to oversize our generation fleet of wind and solar in order to meet the peaks of demand. It means in the troughs of demand, we'll have an excess of renewable energy. We can turn that into hydrogen. That makes a lot of sense. And we can put that hydrogen into the gas grid. So since the late 90s, all new gas appliances in Britain have been able to take about 25% hydrogen. So it's already there for us to have about a quarter of our gas from hydrogen, which we make with excess renewable energy when we've more than we need. So it's a great kind of counterbalance, a symbiosis, if you like, between gas and power.
And why do you think other people are not pushing this? Because it's definitely not the dominant ideology at the moment. Dominant ideology is a complete change of technology, which is going to be very expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know where that push is coming from? The oil and gas industry. And the reason for that is they can make hydrogen in their refineries, they can ship it in their tankers and store it in their tanks. And this is what they know. For them, this is business as usual with a different fuel. And it's a massive mistake. As you say, very expensive. We don't need it. There's also a lot of talk about hydrogen for use in vehicles, which is crazy because the fuel efficiency of a hydrogen vehicle is less than 50%. An electric vehicle is 95%. So we need twice as much energy to drive in hydrogen cars as we do electric.
Is hydrogen still a thing with cars, though? I mean, hasn't electric won that particular battle?
I think so, but still people talk about it. It's still out there. It's part of the whole hydrogen debate. Clean fuel, the only kind of output they say is water vapor out of the exhaust, that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? But
now you were, as I said, you were one of the pioneers of electric vehicles. And the big vision you had was building a grid of charging, around the country in service stations where people could charge. Is the hurdle still too big? I switched to an EV last year. And I love it, and it's great, but it's really expensive to do, in one go. And it's quite inconvenient because I don't have a place to park my car, so I can't charge at home. And I still wonder, having done it myself, whether this is, where we're still quite a way away from this being something everyone can do.
Yeah, I don't think we're too far away. We're maybe a year or two away from a place where new electric cars are comparable in cost to new fossil-powered cars. This is according to the industry, not to me. The lifetime ownership of an electric car is already massively lower. You're talking about a dozen moving parts versus 200 or 300. I mean, you never need to change a clutch or a gearbox or your oil in an electric vehicle, for example. And of course, the fuel cost is much cheaper, maybe a fifth or something like that. But I think like any emerging technology, it's expensive to start with. I mean, if you go back 5 years, it was worse than it is today. Think of mobile phones, think of laptop computers, think of computers, they've got a lot cheaper and a lot more powerful and capable as have phones. So I think electric cars have come a long way anyway, since we built the Nemesis, Britain's first electric supercar, in 2010. And the idea was to demonstrate a different way to get around. I wanted a greener car. There were none in the world to buy, so we thought we'd make one. Got the Nemesis on the road, and it was from that we learned that what was really missing to kickstart this revolution was the means to charge them, because people weren't buying cars because there was nowhere to charge, and people weren't building somewhere to charge because there weren't any cars. It was a classic chicken and egg problem, and we broke that by building a network on the motorways of basically 13 pin plugs. It was very basic technology, but it got us started. We're installing chargers this year that are capable of 350 kilowatts. So 10 years ago, we were doing 7 kilowatts. Today, we're doing 350. Range of a car 10 years ago, 80 miles. Today, 300. So we're fast reaching a place where we can use an electric car in a way that's analogous to a fossil-fueled car, in that all we need to do every week or two is pop to a filling station and fill up. We don't need to worry about being able to plug in at home. 70% of people can in this country. It's an overestimated problem, but it won't matter because these super fast chargers will be everywhere, and we can just pop to a filling station every couple of weeks. So there's a lot of anxiety about range and price and use of electric cars, but it's all going to melt away. And the big car companies won't be making conventional cars in 10 years' time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they're already switching. But I just wonder about your own role in that. I mean, now that this is big. I mean, do you feel you can still compete in this place? Because all the big energy companies are now involved in charging. Tesla have got their network, in service stations. And I know you had a big sort of falling out with them. Do you think there's still space for a company like yours in this when the giants are there already?
The thing is, I don't care to be where I don't need to be. So after we built the Nemesis, I say we started the project. It took 2 years when there were no cars on the road that you could buy. This is 2008. Got it on the road in 2010. And Nissan were launching the Leaf, and we could see that Ford were looking at making one. The big guys were coming into electric cars. And we said to ourselves, there's no point us making electric cars now because it's going to happen. We turned our attention to the network. And, I'm absolutely relaxed about who's in this game, whether it's green energy or electric vehicle charging or plant-based food. I don't care. I want the big guys to be in there. And actually, I want to be redundant, and we'll find a new frontier where we can be more useful as kind of innovators and, people that are quite happy to break the mold to do the right thing.
Can I ask you about COP26, which is the big global summit that's going to be taking place in Scotland later on this year? And it's on our radar, it's in the news a lot, but I'm not sure everyone really gets what it's about or what the point of it is. How do you think we can communicate that? How do you think it should be communicated in terms of how important it is?
Yeah, well, it's a global conference. Just about every country in the world will be represented, and they either will or won't agree some important measures to combat the climate crisis. It's been going on a long time. I went to COP3 in Kyoto in 1997. And, at that conference, for the first time ever, the nations of the world agreed that we needed to limit carbon emissions. It was a huge deal. But actually, the ambition at the time was about 1%, which was tiny. But I was super happy that we had the acknowledgement that there was a problem. We had to do something about it, And if you fast forward to today at COP26, everybody will be talking about how and when we get to zero carbon emissions, net zero.
In the book, you talk about the need for communication and how, we need to learn from populism. You've got a whole chapter about green populism here. What do you think we can learn from the successful populist campaigns to advance this cause?
It's about communication. It's about how we talk about things. And I think the populists like Farage, Johnson and Trump, They show us a different way to communicate about issues. We've got to talk about the climate crisis and sustainability in a way that connects with people. And I don't think we tend to do that. But I'll give you an example of how I think we can and we need to talk about things differently. So quite often we talk about getting to 100% renewable energy on the grid in Britain and how that's beneficial for climate emissions and all that kind of stuff. But we can turn this into an economic argument very easily because we spend £50 billion a year importing fossil fuels just to burn them. That's £1 billion a week. That's 3 times the size of the figure on the Brexit bus, which anyway was a lie. And at the same time, we buy them in dollars, which gives us a foreign currency risk. The price of oil has been 3 times higher than it is today. So that 50 billion could be 150 billion. And if we instead spend that money building ways to harness renewable energy, we have enough of it to power our country many times over. So with that 50 billion, we can build the means to power ourselves completely and call it energy independence. We can be independent from the global markets for fossil fuels, which are manipulated openly by cartels. We can be independent of the exchange rate for the dollar. We can create hundreds of thousands of jobs here and boost our economy, of course, clean up our air, save people's lives, save NHS costs, all of those good things wrapped up. And, you know, the climate benefit is just icing on the cake. Energy independence. It's like Brexit, but it's real.
So do you think it's important to separate climate politics and economics from things like socialism or other social justice causes? Because because they're often the things that alienate sectors of society.
It's an interesting question. I think maybe for some audiences, yes, separation works, and for other audiences, it doesn't. You know, we're not a homogenous group of people, are we? We just started a campaign with the Daily Express probably 6 weeks ago now, actually, and that's been really interesting, talking to a different audience of people. I mean, we did that with football 10 years ago, and that was also interesting. But I think it's really important that we get outside of our bubbles and we talk to other people and we get them connected to what's happening, because it interests and affects absolutely everybody, but we all see things differently.
And are you a socialist?
Yeah, I am. I believe in social justice. I think we can't have true sustainability without fairness.
And so are you active in politics still? Because I know you've been a donor in the past.
No, I'm not active. No. I mean, I speak out. Maybe that counts as being active.
Do you still give money to political parties?
Yeah. When I can, when I have some.
So, I mean, because the ultimate symbol of sort of, I suppose, confounding the cliches is your diamond. You're making diamonds from carbon in the atmosphere now. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, you're right. I think it is the ultimate symbol, and I love it. And the idea has excited me for 10 years since I first had it. And it came about, I was thinking about geoengineering. You may have heard of it, this concept of trying to pull carbon out of the atmosphere on a global scale through seeding the oceans, for example, or whatever it might be. And I thought to myself that getting carbon out of the atmosphere is only step one, really. If we don't lock it up into a permanent form, then we've only done half the job. And of course, I thought the most permanent form of carbon that we know of is a diamond, and how amazing it might be to be able to make diamonds from atmospheric carbon. And it sounded crazy, and I think it was crazy. And everybody I mentioned it to agreed. But we set out on an R&D journey about 7 years ago. We've been making them for a couple of years, and we launched it in November last year, this concept of sky diamonds. And what I love about it is a number of things. But our total ingredient list is the wind, the sun, the rain, and atmospheric carbon. We've got a process that's not low carbon or zero carbon, it's carbon negative. And I think it's probably the first industrial process ever that puts air back into the atmosphere that's cleaner than the air that it took out. So I think of it as proper 21st century technology, exactly the kind of thing we need to fight the climate crisis and live sustainably. And it's a wonderful example of how we can live the kind of life we want to live. We can live and have fun. We just have to do things differently. We like to say whether it's burgers, cars, or football, we can do this. And now we add diamonds to the end of the list, And it's probably our most important message, that living a green life isn't about giving stuff up. It's not about living a life of denial. It's just about doing things differently. And in the case of Sky Diamonds, we like to refer to it as having the bling without the sting.
I mean, you mentioned burgers. I mean, we always have a last question on this podcast, which is how would you change the world? You've kind of spent the last hour or so telling us, and the difficult one is, I think, stopping eating animals for a lot of people. It's a big psychological hurdle there in terms of fun and enjoyment. Because yes, we can now get a burger that tastes quite like a burger that is plant-based, but there's only so many burgers you can eat every day. How easy is it to go plant-based?
Oh, look, it's really easy. Plant-based food is more fun than animal-based food. There's more variety, more texture, more taste, a world of different ingredients. An animal-based diet restricts you. In the center of your plate, you've always got a piece of flesh and you've got some vegetables around it. It's a boring way to live. When you go plant-based, it's a whole new world of culinary experiences. And yeah, it's not all about burgers. Of course it isn't. But also, I don't think it's about making burgers that mimic meat burgers. I'm not a fan of that at all. We don't need to mimic meat because plants of themselves are a fantastic experience. And it's how we used to live. You go back far enough, meat was a very rare thing for humans to eat because it's so relatively expensive to produce.
Well, give me an example. What did you eat yesterday? How fun was it?
I actually had a burger for breakfast, which, may sound all kinds of wrong. I don't know, but it isn't. It's one of our burgers, Devil's Kitchen. I know exactly what's in it. It's super clean food, low saturated fat. For me, it's a great way to start the day. 400 calories, a lot of protein, and I'm away, And then for tea, I had a plate of vegetables and mashed potato and stuff like that. Plant-based eating can be really simple, or it can be really fussy. It's up to you. You get to choose. But I just like to eat simple things. I'm not fussy. One of my favorite concepts is in my book, and usually I use it to describe something else. But it's to pose the question: do you live to eat, or do you eat to live? I eat to live.
Well, look. Finally, as I say, I think you kind of told us what the answer is, but put it in your own words. If you could change the world any way, what would you do?
I would get more people to open their minds. As you say, it's a psychological barrier. That's all it is. To stop eating animals and to switch to a plant-based diet. I think it'd be the most transformative change that we could make. I think the energy revolution is well underway. The transport revolution is well underway. And it would be great if more and more people just decided to ditch animals from their diet. That would make a huge difference.
Dale, Vince, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. If you did, then please do give us a rating or a review so that other people can find this podcast online. Our producer is Rachel Evans. Until next time, bye-bye.